Hey guys, welcome back. Today is Friday and today we are finishing Holes. So if you've been reading along with me guys, this is the last day of reading Holes. Starting next week, I'm going to read another book by Mrs.Clark, and some people say Lewis Sacker. I say Mrs.Clark, and it's called Fuzzy Mud. And at the end of this book, Holes, they preview it, but we'll start reading that book on Monday, called Fuzzy Mud. So today we're reading the end of Holes. When we left off, Stanley and Hector were getting saved. They were going to be leaving Camp Green Lake because they couldn't find Hector or Zero's files, and Stanley, they found out, was innocent. So we're on chapter 49 if you're following along. There never used to be yellow-spotted lizards in the town of Green Lake. They didn't come to the area until after the lake dried up, but the townsfolk had heard about the red-eyed monsters living in the desert hills. One afternoon, Sam, the onion man, and his donkey Mary Lou were returning to his boat, which was anchored just a little bit offshore. It was late in November, and the peach trees had lost most of their leaves. "Sam!" someone called. He turned around to see three men running after him, waving their hats. He waited. "Afternoon, Walter, Bo, Jesse," he greeted them as they walked up, catching their breath. "Glad we caught you," said Bo. "We're going rattlesnake hunting this morning." "We want to get some of your lizard juice," said Walter. "I ain't a scared of no rattlesnake," said Jesse, "but I don't want to come across one of those red-eyed monsters." "I seen one once, and that was enough. I knew about the red eyes, of course. I hadn't heard about the big black teeth." "It's the white tongues that get me," said Bo. Sam gave each man 2 bottles of pure onion juice. He told them to drink 1 bottle before going to bed that night, and then a half of a bottle in the morning, and then a half of a bottle around lunchtime. "You sure this stuff works?" asked Walter. "I tell you what," said Sam, "if it doesn't, you can come back next week and I'll give you your money back." That's funny because if they come back next week after getting bit by a lizard, they'll be dead. Walter looked around unsure as Bo and Jesse laughed. And then Sam laughed too. Even Mary Lou let out a rare hee-haw. "Just remember," Sam told the men before they left, "it's very important for you to drink a bottle tonight. You gotta get it in your bloodstream. The lizards don't like onion blood." Stanley and Zero sat in the back seat of Miss Marengo's BMW. The suitcase lay between them. It was locked, and they decided that they'd let Stanley's father try to open it in his workshop. "You don't know what's in it, do you?" she asked. "No," said Stanley. "I didn't think so." The air conditioning was on, but they drove with the windows open as well because, no offense, but you boys really smell bad. Ms. Marengo explained that she was a patent attorney. "I'm helping your father with a new product that he's invented. He happened to mention your situation, so I did a little investigating. Clyde Livingston's sneakers were stolen sometime before 3:15. I found a young man, Derek Dunn, who said that at 3:20 you were in the bathroom fishing your notebook out of the toilet. 2 girls remembered seeing you come out of the boys' restroom carrying a wet notebook." Stanley felt his ears redden. Even after everything that he had been through, the memory still caused him to feel shame. "So you couldn't have stolen them," said Miss Marengo. "He didn't. I did," said Zero. "You what?" asked Miss Marengo. "I stole the sneakers." The lawyer actually turned around while driving and looked at him. "I didn't hear that," she said, "and I advise you to make sure that I don't hear it again." "What did my father invent?" Stanley asked. "Did he find a way to recycle sneakers?" "No, he's still working on that," explained Miss Marengo, "but he invented a product that eliminates foot odor. Here, I've got a sample in my briefcase. I wish I had more. You two could bathe in it." She opened her briefcase with one hand and she passed a small bottle back to Stanley. It had a fresh, somewhat spicy smell. He handed it to Zero. "What's it called?" Stanley asked. "Well, we haven't come up with a name yet," said Miss Marengo. "It smells familiar," said Zero. "Peaches, right?" asked Miss Marengo. "That's what everyone says." So, just to make sure everyone's getting this, Stanley and Zero didn't get bit by a lizard, when they were in the hole because they've been eating onions, and the lizards don't bite you if you have onion juice in your system, we just found out. And the peaches, well, that's what helped Stanley's father to finally make his product. So a short while later, both boys fell asleep. Behind them, the sky had turned dark, and for the first time in over 100 years, a drop of rain fell into the empty lake. So that's the end of part 2. Part 3 is just called Filling in the Holes. Stanley's mother insists that there was never any curse. She even doubts whether or not Stanley's great-great-grandfather really stole a pig. The reader might find it interesting, however, that Stanley's father invented his cure for foot odor the very day after the great-great-grandson of Elia Yelnats carried the great-great-great-grandson of Madame Zeroni up the mountain. The Attorney General closed Camp Green Lake. Ms. Walker, who was in desperate need of money, had to sell the land, which had been in her family for generations. It was bought by a national organization dedicated to the well-being of young girls. In a few years, Camp Green Lake will become a Girl Scout camp. And guys, that's called irony. It's ironic because Mr. Pendanski always said, this is not a Girl Scout camp. This is pretty much the end of the story. The reader probably still has some questions, but unfortunately, from here on in, the answers tend to be long and tedious. While Mrs. Bell, Stanley's former math teacher, might want to know the percent change in Stanley's weight, the reader probably cares more about the change in Stanley's character and self-confidence. But those changes are subtle and hard to measure. There is no simple answer. Even the contents of the suitcase turned out to be somewhat tedious. Stanley's father pried it open in his workshop, and at first everyone gasped at the sparkling jewels. Stanley thought that he and Hector had become millionaires, but the jewels were really of poor quality, worth no more than $20,000. Underneath the jewels was a stack of papers that had once belonged to the first Stanley Yelnats. These consisted of stock certificates, deeds of trust, and promissory notes. They were more hard to read and even more difficult to understand. Miss Marengo's law firm spent more than 2 months going through all of those papers, but they turned out to be a lot more valuable than the jewels. After the legal fees and taxes, Stanley and Zero each received a little less than $1 million, but not a lot less. It was enough for Stanley to buy his family a new house with a laboratory in the basement, and for Hector to hire a team of private investigators. But it would be boring to go through all the tedious details of all the changes in their lives. Instead, the reader will be presented with one last scene, which took place almost a year and a half after Stanley and Hector left Camp Green Lake. You will have to fill in the holes for yourself. There was a small party at the Yelnats' house. Except for Stanley and Hector, everyone there was an adult. All kinds of snacks and drinks were set out on the counter, including caviar, champagne, and the fixings to make ice cream sundaes. Remember, that's what Zero wanted to eat when they were going to Big Thumb. The Super Bowl was on television, but nobody was really watching. It should be coming on at the next break, Miss Marengo announced. A timeout was called in the football game, and a commercial came onto the screen. Everyone stopped talking and watched. The commercial showed a baseball game. Amid a cloud of dust, Clyde Livingston slid into home plate as the catcher caught the ball and tried to tag him out. "Safe!" shouted the umpire as he signaled with his arms. The people at Stanley's house all cheered as if the run really counted. Clyde Livingston got up and dusted the dirt off of his uniform, and he made his way back to the dugout. He spoke to the camera. "Hi, I'm Clyde Livingston, but everyone around here calls me Sweet Feet." "Way to go, Sweet Feet," said another baseball player, slapping his hand. Besides being on the television screen, Clyde Livingston was also sitting on the couch, right next to Stanley. "But my feet weren't always so sweet," the television Clyde Livingston was saying as he sat down on the dugout bench. "They used to smell so bad that nobody would sit near me in the dugout." "They really did stink," said the woman sitting on the couch on the other side of Clyde. She held her nose with one hand and she fanned the air with the other. Clyde shushed her, and then a teammate told me about sploosh, said the television Clyde. He pulled out a can of sploosh out from under the dugout bench and held it up for everyone to see. You see, I just spray a little on each foot every morning, and now I really do have sweet feet. Plus, I like the tingle. Sploosh, said a voice, a treat for your feet. Made from all natural ingredients, it neutralizes odor-causing fungi and bacteria. Plus, you'll like the tingle. Everyone at the party clapped their hands. He wasn't lying, the woman who sat next to Clyde said. I couldn't even be in the same room with his socks. Other people at the party laughed. The woman continued, I'm not joking. It was bad. Okay, you've made your point, said Clyde, covering her mouth with his hand. He looked back at Stanley. Will you do me a favor, Stanley? Stanley raised and lowered his left shoulder. I'm going to go get more caviar, said Clyde. You keep your hand over my wife's mouth. He patted Stanley on the shoulder as he rose from the couch. Stanley looked uncertainly at his hand and then at Clyde Livingston's wife. She winked at him. He felt himself blush and then turned away towards Hector, who was sitting on the floor in front of an overstuffed chair. Oh boy, I can't read this part without crying. A woman sitting in the chair behind Hector was absent-mindedly fluffing his hair with her fingers. She wasn't very old, but her skin had a weathered look to it, almost like leather. Her eyes seemed weary, as if she had seen too many things in her life that she didn't want to see, and when she smiled, her mouth seemed too big for her face. Very softly, she half-hummed a song that her grandmother used to sing to her when she was a little girl. If only, the moon speaks no reply, reflecting the sun and all that's gone by. Be strong, my weary wolf. Turn around boldly, fly high, my baby bird, my angel, my only. Sorry, I'm such a baby about this book, but he found his mom. And that's the end of that book. And guys, on Monday, we're going to start reading Fuzzy Mud by Mrs.Clark. Have a great weekend.